Today I'm going to talk about Saint Mary of Egypt. She is greatly respected in the Byzantine Church. In the Roman Church, she is the patron saint of penitence. In the Byzantine Church, her feast day is April 1st, and she is also remembered on the 5th Sunday of the Great Fast, otherwise known as Lent. She was born in the year 344 in Egypt, and at age 12 she ran away from home, and she lived a lifestyle of prostitution. And some people choose this lifestyle, others are forced into it, and some feel they have no other options. But for Mary of Egypt, it seemed like she voluntarily chose the lifestyle and continued to stay with it for quite a few years. After 17 years of her lifestyle, she traveled to Jerusalem for the great feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. Now, her life has been documented by Saint Sophronius, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, who lived 634. He was the Patriarch of Jerusalem from the year 634 to 638. Mary of Egypt took this pilgrimage. She undertook it as sort of an anti-pilgrimage against the Christians. And so she continued her lifestyle on her way. And when she reached the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, an invisible barrier prevented her from entering. She realized it was because of her sins, and she repented upon seeing an icon of the Theotokos, and she prayed for forgiveness and promised to give up her lifestyle and the world. And upon her repentance, she was able to enter the church. After venerating a relic of the true cross, she returned to the icon, the Theotokos icon, to give thanks, and heard a voice telling her, "If you cross the Jordan, you will find glorious rest." And so she immediately went to the monastery of St. John the Baptist on the bank of the River Jordan, where she received absolution and afterwards Holy Communion. The next day she crossed the Jordan and retired to the desert for the rest of her life, which was over 40 years. She lived as a hermit in penitence, and she took with her only 3 loaves of bread, and once they were gone she found food for herself in the wilderness. Approximately 1 year before her death, she recounted her life to Saint Zosimus of Palestine, who encountered her in the desert. When he unexpectedly met her in the desert, he did not even recognize that she was a human, and she was not wearing any clothes at that point. She asked him to toss a cloak to cover herself, and then she narrated her life story to him. She asked him to meet her at the banks of the Jordan on Holy Thursday the following year and bring her communion. And so he did come to the bank of the Jordan on Holy Thursday of the following year, brought her communion, and she crossed the river to get to him by walking on the surface of the water, and received Holy Communion. And she told him to meet her there again the following Lent. The next year, Zosimus traveled to the same spot where he first met her, and he found her there lying dead. According to an inscription written on the sand next to her head, she had died the very night he had given her communion and been somehow miraculously transported to the place he found her, and her body was preserved incorrupt. And so he buried the body with the assistance of a passing lion, and he recounted the story of her life to his fellow brethren at the monastery, and it was preserved in tradition until Saint Sophronius wrote it down. And so Saint Mary of the Desert, Saint Mary of Egypt, she is known as one of the Desert Mothers, known as the Desert Mother in the Eastern churches. And so we can use some of the life story from her radical conversion as hope for us today in our modern culture that celebrates the sins of lust. And it's certainly very prevalent in everyday life, really. You know, with her conversion, it also gives us hope for those around us. There are similar radical conversions, such as the story of St. Paul, St. Paul's life, how he had his radical conversion, and St. Mary of the Desert it's a very interesting story how she was able to live in the desert in repentance for over 40 years. And I don't know that any of us could really do something like that. I mean, if we could, then it'd be good to join a monastery first, maybe, a cloistered monastery, secluded from the world. But St. Mary of Egypt is certainly an inspiring story, so we ask her intercession as we struggle through this life and prepare for the next. So thank you so much for watching. We are the laity, and we will not be silent.